Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I would like to share my experience on how you can run a MySQL database instance on Docker and connect a standalone Java application using JPA. This is an extension of my previous video that uses JDBC. And before we can proceed, it is required that you watch the video to set up the MySQL instance running on Docker. So pause this video and navigate to this URL or the one in the description box. At this point, I assume that you already have a running MySQL instance on Docker. Again, our project source code is available from GitHub in the description box. We will begin by examining our main class JPA MySQL Demo. This class is very similar to JDBC template MySQL Demo, but as you can see, we did not execute any SQL statement. Let's try running this class and see how it works by pressing Ctrl F11 or just F11 for debug. As we expected, we got the same result as the JDBC demo. Insert, fetch, find, update, fetch, then find, and then delete, and then finally fetch, find ID, so we have null. We will explain this output later. Now let's check the class. In the constructor, we can see that we are calling persistence_manager.instance.getEntityManager. This class is an enum that contains an instance of itself. This is what we call a singleton pattern, which is a subject for future discussion. In the enum, we initialize the entity manager factory with a parameter Czetsuya pu. This is the persistent unit name defined in the persistence.xml. This persistent unit. The getEntityManager. This method creates a connection to the database and is ready to accept SQL commands. These classes are available from the dependencies that we have added in the pom.xml file. We have the iHibernate entity manager, which gives us the entity manager, and the Hibernate C3PO, which manage the connection from our application to MySQL. And to actually connect that, we need the MySQL connector Java. Let's proceed with the tests. Each test starts with a beginning transaction and ends with commit. Inside the transaction boundary, we can execute SQL commands such as remove, this is the delete in SQL statement, update, which is merge, insert is persist, and when you persist an entity, it will automatically fill the get ID or the ID field of the product entity. Let's try debugging this later. Then we have test fetch all, which selects all the records in our table product. And this is find by entity type and the ID, which is a product ID, which is the ID of the product that we have inserted earlier in the test. Notice the product class. This is what we call an entity, which represents a table in the database. Rather than manually building your query using SQL statements, we use a Java object instead. An entity class should at least be annotated with @entity and @table. And here we can supply the name of the table that we have in the database. By default, it will use the product name. That's why often we override the name property. These annotations are required so that Hibernate will pick the product entity. the property fields mapped to the table columns are annotated as well. This is the ID, this is the code, and just like the table, we can override the name because by default, without the name property in the column, it will use this field name as the table column name. A more in-depth tutorial is available from Hibernate, and as usual, the link is available below in the description box. Let's try running the application again, and this time in debug mode so that we can actually observe how the entities are created, updated, and deleted. So here, let's go with insert, press F3 so that we will go to the method and add a breakpoint. Press F6 to continue. So we create a new transaction. We initialize the product object. We set the code, the description, the amount, and the created date. And finally, we persist or insert the product entity. After we insert the product, if we hover on the product variable, we can see that the ID is filled. Initially, it is not. So it's now ID 10. And then we will save the ID to the product ID variable. And finally, we will commit the transaction. If we don't commit the transaction, the product that we have saved here will not be saved in the database. Okay, next is fetch all, which will actually query all the contents of the database. So it printed the product that we have just created, ID 10, and description is iPhone 11. And then this one is find by the entity type and the given primary ID value or the primary key value, which is 10. It will return our product and it will print it, which is similar to this one. And then the next test is the update method. Before we can actually update an entity, we need to again first begin the transaction and find the entity that we wanted to update. So here, instead of find by ID, I'm using a create query from entity manager method that selects the product with code iPhone 11. And since code is unique, we are guaranteed to get a single result, which is the product that we have just created. And then we will set the description and execute the merge operation, which is actually the update. And finally, commit the transaction so that the description, the new description that we assign to the product will be saved to the database. And then again, it will fetch the database so that we can see the new record or the record that we have updated. And this is the new description. And finally, we have the delete. Again, let's add a breakpoint here. And this is the delete operation. Again, we start with the transaction begin operation. And then this is our create query again, because we need to find the entity that we will delete. So here we are sure that we have a product with code iPhone 11 because we have just created it. And then we execute the remove from the entity manager class, which is actually the delete statement in JDBC. And finally, we commit the transaction so that the operation that we have just did will be saved in the database. And again, it will fetch the database. So we should not see any record after the fetch. So here, find by ID, found null, because we have already created the we have already deleted the iPhone 11 product. Now let's try this again. This time, let's monitor the ID that is being created, because earlier I think I forgot to show you that. So this is fetch all, press F8 to continue, then this is insert. We are on insert. If we hover on the product variable, we will notice that the ID field is null. And after we execute the persist method from entity manager, the ID is filled. Here, the ID. So a new ID is automatically generated 11 because the ID that we have earlier is 10. In here, we will notice that the long ID is annotated with ID and has a generated value annotation with strategy identity, meaning Hibernate will handle the generation of ID for this particular entity. That concludes our look at running a MySQL database instance on Docker and connecting a Java standalone application using either JDBC or JPA. Help me keep this channel going by liking and sharing my videos and subscribing as well. See you in the next video.